works. We are recording today, and I'm so honored to have these presenters here today on discussion boards. I've been reading a lot about good pedagogy and discussion boards, and am so impressed with the creative things and impactful things that these faculty are doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce them one by one when it's their time to start, and we will hear from all of them, all 5 of them. So first off is Brittany Johnson, and Brittany is an assistant professor of nutritional dietetics and wonderful teacher, and she's going to talk to us about how she uses discussion boards. Go, Brittany.
Thank you. I hope everybody's doing well, especially with this announcement that we're going to be remote. So hopefully you learn a little bit about discussion boards. I know for me, I do so much interaction with groups of students in my classroom while I teach that I try to simulate that same environment using discussion boards. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And I'll show you 2 examples of how I try to get away from maybe the standard discussion board of post a summary and then reply to 2 people. So here's one example where I do case studies. So this particular case study, because I teach nutrition, one of the topics for that week is actually about nutrition for athletes and physical activity. So I provide a student with an option to select one of the following case studies. Essentially what they're doing is they have to read the textbook, obviously, with the topic for physical activity and nutrition. And then they're taking that information and applying it to critically analyze a particular case study. So for example, one of the students may pick case study number 2, where they're designing a nutrition plan for a 21-year-old male baseball player who's 6'3" and weighs 210 pounds. So it gets them into that involvement of creating a customized new plan for that particular athlete. And then not only that, identifying that there's differences between these different sports and that nutrition is going to look different for someone who's in baseball compared to basketball, compared to swimming, etc. So they choose one case study, and this is what I would have them do in class as well. They would choose a case study. They do all this background information, like I was just explaining, and that's their initial post. So in the classroom, I would have them do that on their own, and then I would say, okay, get with this other group of people who have different case studies. So that's actually their follow-up. So part of their follow-up now, so their second post on that discussion board, they have to find 2 peers that selected a different case study. So again, with my example, if I chose case study number 2, I need to find a student who did case study number 1, 3, or 4. And part of my response is comparing and contrasting some of those different nutritional plans for the different sports based off of that actual demand of that particular, I almost said firefighter because my research is in firefighting, that particular athlete. So that's something where, again, I would have them have those conversations in the classroom. And so I'm really trying to engage them in the course content and make it more interactive compared to what did you learn about nutrition and physical activity in that relationship. So being able to have them critically apply the information, and then not only that, take it a step further to where they're dialoguing with their peers and kind of talking about what are some similarities between fueling a female track field player compared to a male baseball player. So it gets them involved a little bit more beyond just the provide a critique to 2 of your peers. That's 5 minutes, Jo. Do you want me to show one more example, or if there's questions?
Oh no, you have plenty of time.
Okay, I know. So one other option that I want to show you that I do with discussions, again, trying to simulate what I do in a classroom. So I do a lot of gallery walks. So in the classroom, I might have a student pick a particular topic. So this discussion board, for example, is on micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. Water is also a micronutrient, but we're focused on vitamins and minerals for this particular discussion board. In the classroom, I would actually have them select a particular vitamin or mineral, or I would sign it to them. And they would write out what's the main function, what are some food sources, if they're deficient in it, if they have too much of it, what are some symptoms. So then they would post it on the classroom wall with that big white post-it that we use a lot in the classroom. And then the students would go around the classroom after every student is done with their particular vitamin or mineral and start to identify some common themes among these vitamins and minerals. So to simulate that same gallery walk for this particular discussion board, I broke them up into groups. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe there's like 25 students in this class right now. So they're evenly, as best I can, divided into this. And their initial post, they have to select either A through F here. And there's one group that happens to have 7 students. So that's why I gave them the G option. And they need to take ownership. So I'm gonna say, I want to select A. And so I'm gonna make an infographic on vitamins A, C, and E. And as a second student who goes into post, if I see that somebody's already selected A, then I need to move on and select B, C, D. You can number them 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. I just did letters. So after that, it's a little bit of kind of a weird coordination. So what I do is I actually post a video inside the discussion board explaining how they can select it to give more instructions. But then if they selected, let's say A, and they have vitamins A, C, and E, they're then going to create some type of template. So they have to do the major functions, good food sources, and then deficiencies and toxicities for those 3 vitamins. I provide them in a sample here too. So let's see if this pops up. I think I have my whole screen shared, so you should be able to see it. Joe, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Okay. So this is one example that a student did in a summer school class that I'm teaching right now, where they had sodium. And they chose to do a PowerPoint, and that's fine. They can do whatever medium they want to. And it provides all that content, rainbow wheel here, provides that content that they're looking for. This particular group, I didn't have them do the deficiencies and toxicities because it's a little bit of a lower level compared to the one I'm showing you right now. So they would post that as their initial post. And then their second post here is in their small groups. Again, they're just looking at the letters A through F if they have all the people in that group. And they need to read through everybody's infographic or PowerPoint, whatever visual display they selected. And they need to do that gallery walk. So what they're doing is they're looking at what are some common functions across all the vitamins and minerals, because there are some that have overlapping functions. For example, potassium and phosphorus are good for bone health. And then also, what are some overlapping food sources for some nutrients? For example, spinach has good source of iron and vitamin A. And then based off of that, how is this now going to change their perspective on some future food choices, especially because when we're selecting food options in our society, we tend to forget about the micronutrients, and while they're tiny, they're mighty. And so I'm trying to get them to apply it to their real life. So this is, again, another way that I've taken what I do in the classroom and try to put that on a discussion board as best that I can. So it's not just your standard, tell me the major function of this vitamin or mineral, and they're really able to critically apply that content that they're reading about in the textbook, and also developing that Bloom's taxonomy part. So those are 2 examples of how I've been able to transition my discussion boards. I've really gone away from just having students summarize and having them critically analyze. And in the transition from spring semester, I got really good feedback from students saying that they enjoyed it. And while that second post might be a little bit different, I'm able to provide a short video kind of thoroughly explaining what the expectation is, because they're so used to just reply to 2 people, reply to 2 people. So I'm trying to kind of push the boundary a little bit with them, and they got the hang of it and they did a really great job. So I'll stop there. If there's questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Can you just tell me how you feel about the learning compared to in face-to-face, because you've done these things both ways? How's the learning?
Yeah, I think that feedback from students, they felt they still had that same environment. And I think a really good example would be spring semester, because we started in person and then we transitioned to online. So they're able to evaluate both how I was teaching in the classroom versus how I taught online. And a lot of them expressed, sent out a little questionnaire that they didn't feel their learning declined at all. So again, it's a little bit more work, I think, because they're used to just kind of showing up to class and having a few things handed to them maybe, but the expectation is still that they're reading the textbook before they come into the classroom. So I think that it actually is almost even a better learning environment personally for them, because they're really having to take ownership of that learning more so on the online platform.
So I'm opening this up for questions. I don't see any questions in the chat box. You could put questions in the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask a question.
I see one that was privately sent to me, and it says, how is the student's input evaluated, graded? I have a rubric that's available for the students, and it says what the criteria is in order for them to get the highest level based off of the initial post. And then I also have participation points in there. So for example, 50% of the overall rubric goes towards participation. So if they don't do their second post, then they miss those points. So it's graded with a rubric.
So the participation points is only geared toward the second post?
Yep.
Okay. And so the gallery walk, everything that you said in that second one, I'm not sure about the first one, is all in a small group. So we're only evaluating or reading our small groups, different micronutrients. Was that the second one? I can't even remember.
Yeah, and sorry, I muted myself. I live downtown and the street's really busy, so there's a lot of street noise. But yes, so I did the small groups on the discussion board, so that way they're not reading through, let's say, 30 students' content, and they're just in that small group of them and maybe 5 other students or 4 other students, depending on the class size. And that's how I do most of my discussion boards, is in that smaller group, because it helps them, I think, build relationship a little bit better, and it's not so overwhelming to go through the thread of, 30 students' initial discussion board post.
And how do you set up those small groups? Do you choose them or how?
Canvas has a great feature that you can randomly split students into a group when you're actually doing the discussion board. So when you're designing the discussion board, you can click on this is a group discussion, and then you can drop down and you can either manually put students into a different group, or you can have Canvas randomly put them in based off of your class size. So you can say, if you have 21 students in your class and you want groups of 3, you just say evenly divide into 7 groups. And then it creates that group under people on Canvas. And then when you're going on the drop down part on the discussion board, you just select that person. I can show you on Canvas if that's easier for everybody too.
Brittany, I have a question. The one thing that my biggest concern about, I've done online teaching before in the past, and with this quick transition to online, I did that too for Point Loma. So my only concern about, and what I've seen and what I've done research on this, is it's the one thing that students are missing in an online environment is that human interaction. So do you feel like putting people in the groups, and I've done that before in my last class, putting people in groups builds that connection between students and their classmates?
I haven't personally measured that in my class, so I don't really have an answer for that. I think that's a good research question to kind of evaluate. And I make them in different groups every week. So I don't keep them in the same group for every discussion board, and I don't know what the best practice is for that, but I wanted them to have diverse voices that they're interacting with every week versus the same 4 students every week. So I don't think that really answers your question, but.
Do you think possibly that doing a pre-class survey at the onset of class, that, asking students, what do you look, we want to know, of course, what they're going to learn in the class or what they're hoping to glean from the class. But as far as, to include one of those questions, as far as what do you hope to accomplish, or, what are you looking for in this class? Because I'm just thinking of the whole dynamic and online class environment as to what kind of things that, students are looking for. Because we want them to have the buy-in on this, because this is what we're having to do right now. But also too, you don't want to miss that human piece. So I'm just wondering, in your experience as a teacher, that doing a pre and a post survey in your class would be helpful to know what students are thinking.
Yeah, and I don't do a formal survey normally when I'm teaching face-to-face. However, the first day of class, I do have those conversations. And for example, my summer school class that I'm teaching right now, the first night we do a synchronous Zoom and I ask those questions to kind of get the feel, because I think each group of students is going to be a little bit different.
Yes.
But that's a good idea to do a formal survey part.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump in where we're done. Brittany, that was awesome. I know there may be a lot, I have lots more questions I could ask, but we've got to move on. Thank you so much. And then next, we're going to hear from Jamie Gates. And Jamie is a professor of cultural anthropology. And Jamie, if you'll unmute yourself and just share with us about your discussion boards.
Well, good afternoon, colleagues, and it's great to be with you and learning to go through this all together. I say I got a little school spirit on, got the Point Loma t-shirt on today just to add a little spirit to the moment. I'm going to also share screen here and just give you 3 examples of what I've been doing. One, and increasingly complex, I would say. All right. So near the beginning of my cultural anthropology course, I use images a lot to just complex images to help bring about discussion. And normally this happens in person. I break students into small groups in the classroom, but the breakout rooms in the Zoom work really well as an alternative. But I always want to prep them with a conversation before they come into the class around the topic we're going to discuss. And so when we go to discuss cultural relativism and the distance between cultural relativism and critical cultural relativism and ethnocentrism, excuse me, I'll throw this picture up and give them a chance to dialogue about this in a kind of a standard dialogue, a standard discussion online. I'll show you the prompt here. And this is, I give them a minimum of minimum words they have to post. There's a rubric attached to this, like Brittany was saying with hers. This typically is the shortest version of a description that I'll give for what students are to do. Here's a simple post response and respond to 2 others by the start of the class or by the start of the discussion. And in the synchronous room, I think what I wanted to bring this one up in part because it's very useful. I found this one one of the most active discussions when we get into the Zoom class or in the standard classroom. And in the Zoom class, I tend to break students into groups by random assignment at the beginning, like Brittany was saying, and typically in groups of no more than 3 or 4, actually. And then the toughest thing is decide on how long to allow those groups to run. So they've already chatted back and forth about this picture, about what ethnocentrism is off of some other readings. So I assume there's some base of knowledge. And so I played around with like 3 or 4 minutes or 6 or 7 minutes and then in between. And I'm finding that 3 or 4 minutes is definitely too short, but to go up to 6 or 7 minutes to keep them focused is too long. So I'm in the 4 to 5 minute range at most when it comes to having them unpack something with 3 or 4 people in a breakout room. And typically I give them a very focused question for that breakout room that they're supposed to go around and chat. I also tell them that I will likely drop in on some of the groups as there's this great function in Zoom where you can drop into the discussion groups along the way. And so I'll randomly jump in, and across the semester, they know I'm popping in. So I think that helps keep the discussions on task a little more. So this is a very simple one. I'll show you a second example that I use in discussion groups. Same class, Intro to Cultural Anthropology, but here we're trying to get into something more complex, like the definition of race and ethnicity and its application. And so I work with a definition in the class. If you'll see here down under point number 1, where race and ethnicity, I want them to be able to describe what race and ethnicity as socially constructed, historically situated, and politically contested constructs are. I know that's a big mouthful. So we take quite a bit of time on this. It's a higher set of points for this discussion. But before they come, and here's another, I call them poignant images here. Here's another image in which I just give them the image ahead of time before they get into any kind of theoretical readings or deeper discussion. I say, okay, unpack what's going on here. This was 1876. It's a cover of Harper's Weekly magazine. And I find a lot of content coming off of just prompting them to tell me what's going on at this particular historical moment and what the political cartoonist was trying to say. And then I'll take this same image, we'll bring it back into the discussions when we come back to class. But I thought I'd show you, it's a slightly more complex set of instructions here. And I have a 150 word minimum, so it's a longer response I expect out of each person. And then there's a rubric attached to this as well. So each of the discussions I use, I have a very specific rubric. In the same class, I'll use the same rubric for most of the discussions unless I vary the format of the discussion. And so when I say vary the format of the discussion, I'll show you one other format that I use, one other dominant example here. This is in an upper division class, it's in globalization and culture. And I structured, for the first time, I tried a debate. So the Canvas allows you to put students in groups, as Brittany was saying, and you can then attach a debate and sides to a debate within a group. Or in this case, what I did is I assigned the students by last name to take a particular side, whether they agreed with that side or not. I'll scroll down here and you can see the instructions to that. We were debating, in that class, we were debating the benefits and the weaknesses of the Green Revolution from the 1950s. So I gave them a few different video resources. Some of them were pro, some of them were con, some of them were a little more balanced.
Jamie, I can't see, I'm just still looking at the same race and ethnicity one that you had up.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Let me see why that's not sharing on a different screen.
You may have to unshare this one and then share the other if it's.
Let me do that.
If you share your screen, you can toggle from one to the next without having to get out of share.
Yeah, I toggled and it didn't share. So can you see this now?
Yes.
There's a globe in front of you, or half a globe.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll go back to top here. So this is one of those where it's an initial post, a critical response, and a rebuttal and a final opinion of theirs. So I've had sort of a 4-stage discussion here. Students really responded well to this. And if I scroll down, I know this will make you dizzy just for a second, but if I go down here, you see the level of discussion and content was really substantive. And they went back and forth with one another. And I got a lot of comments back about the debate format working because they learned something from a perspective they didn't necessarily go into the discussion believing. And so I found that particularly helpful in this over controversial issue that's very complex. So I divided the students up here, A through L, M through Z, and they had to take a side based on that. And then the instructions here, I had to learn a little. If the instructions are too complex, too many things going on all at the same time, the discussion falls flat. So I'll give you a quick example here. This immigration discussion, did it flip over? Can you see this immigration discussion there, Joe?
Yes.
So immigration discussion, all I want you to look at here is in my instructions here, I say, synthesize, and I have 3 bullet points. And when responding to your classmates, I have 3 bullet points, and I just had too much going on in each of those sections. So that I'll throw that out and then I'll stop here. That when you're creating these online discussions that you also are going to unpack in the classroom, you can save some of the real complex stuff for unpacking in the classroom in the Zoom synchronous time. But yeah, so this what I would say it's always a fun discussion, but it fell flat as a discussion here. So all right, I'll throw those examples out and stop there.
Okay, any questions? If you want to ask a question, you can type in chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Could I see the debating rules again there, Jamie? They weren't quite up on the screen.
Absolutely. Let me pull that back up again. And I thank Skip Rutledge because I emailed him and said, hey, what kind of rules do you all use?
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm just curious, do some students sort of coattail, I guess, where you find that they tend to look at other people's posts and sort of reform them in their own words, but basically no new ideas. Is there a problem with discussion boards sort of attracting that kind of behavior?
Yeah, I actually use the Canvas setting to make them post before they can see others' posts.
Oh,
So
is that right?
that's one way to do it. So they have to make a contribution before they can contribute to anything else.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we have a few more minutes if somebody has another question.
Yeah, I just had one more question about, so it appears that you kind of scaffold your discussions to see what level of skill your students are as discussion before you moved into the debate thing. Is that would be one of your major recommendations?
With the, I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but with the upper division course, I know the students' academic level by the time I get to that discussion, and I intentionally, in that case, not in that case, in other cases, I put folks across genders and across, if they're from like junior, seniors, I'll split them up in the groups. In that case, that was just by last name. But in terms of how do I scaffold their abilities, could you help me understand?
I guess what I'm more referring to is deciding what format you're going to use for the discussion, or the type of questions you're going to based on the sophistication level of your kids.
Yeah, it's actually more based on the sophistication of the material that I'm working with than assuming anything about their sophistication. So the debate format works really well with a controversial issue, even if it's a complex, multi-layered, and in fact, maybe even better if it's multi-layered. And then more the standard discussion, I think, is just to, for me, it's to bring out initial issues or their initial perspective. Like the race and ethnicity picture, it brings up all kinds of misperceptions of what's going on there and misperceptions about race. And then in the classroom, we unpack that first in small groups, and then I bring some historical info and good theory to the table to counter some misperceptions.
But do you start with an easier, I mean, you wouldn't start with that debate first thing in the class. They're used
Right. That comes near that one comes near the end of the class, and they've had a lot of other material that helps get them to that point. And the debate, I haven't tried the debate early on in a lower division GE class like culture and topology. I've used the debate only in the upper division courses, smaller courses so far.
Can you tell me how you keep up with the debate? I mean, like, how do you keep up?
Because the debates are happening I also put them in groups there. So because the debate's happening in groups, so they don't have to debate everybody all at the same time. Have them debate in small groups. I can drop into 6 groups easily, or 4 groups, depending on the size of the class, easier than I can drop into trying to figure out who's all debating whom elsewhere. So it's like containing the discussion into groups helps.
But you wouldn't necessarily know if I was in a group and I just didn't hardly participate. You wouldn't know.
No, I would, because it's all recorded there. I can see who's participating, who's not participating.
Okay, awesome. Jamie, thanks so much. You've given us a lot to think about. I really appreciate it. Very creative. And just as a side note, Skip Rutledge did a presentation for us a few years ago on debate, and we have a lot of his resources on our website, if that's kind of interesting to you, like how to structure a debate. What Jamie said, he reached out to Skip. We may already have it on our website. I am going to mute everyone again. And so now we're moving on to Kellye Carroll. And Kellye is an assistant professor of child development. And Kellye, if you will unmute and just tell us about your discussion board.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm going to screen share. And as I'm pulling that up, okay, not showing up in here. I'll provide some context as I'm figuring this out. But all of the examples I'm providing here are going to be from this past semester. And they are also in classes where students were already in teams. So everything that you see is going to be a discussion board within a team that already existed and met in person. Let's see, here we go. Okay. All right, can we all see that?
Yes.
One good, okay. All right. Okay, this is a lot to look at. So one question, so I'm going to be sharing how students, like most of you, I was entering a time in my courses where they were preparing for projects and presentations, and I had to kind of think on my toes of how am I going to not lose the integrity of that student work and the sharing and, you know, the culminating of a course and celebrating all we have learned. And so what I did, and I'm going to share examples from 2 courses, one upper division and one lower division. And here is one of my favorite projects is the late adulthood project, in which students interview someone in late adulthood and spend just quality time with them, which obviously was a challenge during this context, but my students really rose to that challenge. So what I gave students some guidelines on what I was expecting them to do, in addition to the general assignment guidelines, which we had talked about in class, but now they needed to provide a Google slide or a PowerPoint and then share that with their learning team, which I had then transferred into Canvas. And so they made the slides, they shared them with their learning team groups. And the big takeaway from this, you can see the prompt here, but the big takeaway was, especially in the lower division class, students really needed slide-by-slide guidelines and time and length guidelines. So they did well and this isn't, as you can see, this isn't very complex here. There isn't a lot, but it is saying here are 4 slides that we need to see. This is what needs to be on the slide. And then the rubric that I modified also reflected that. So this is my upper division course, Parent Education and Family Development. And these students also had a big project coming up, which was a parent handbook and a workshop. So they had already started working on those. And I gave the students the option of creating either a voiceover of their handbook or doing kind of a YouTube, like a video presentation and posting it into their learning groups here, and then responding. And my takeaway of this is I would require the video component in the future. I wanted to be flexible. I wanted to give students, we were struggling with connectivity issues and just not being familiar with different ways of recording. So I wanted to make it as easy as possible with them then. But now this semester that we're going to be starting out with this format, I'll probably give them resources to help them. But I felt the students who presented via a YouTube link, they dressed up, they were really working on their professional voice and stepping into that role of presenting a proposal for a parent workshop. And so I think that the video component was something that I'm going to stick with in the future. All right, my favorite kind of takeaway from the semester and these adventures of moving online was this feedback component of that late adulthood projects. And what I did with my thinking, and many of you probably did the same thing, you just kind of break apart your course into chunks and try to figure out how we're going to make this happen in a different format. And something that was happening with these late adulthood projects around this time was the opportunity to work in their learning teams in class, 5 minutes, 5-minute check-ins, and talk about answer questions. Who are you meeting with? How's that going? What questions are you going to ask? And the students always really seem to make the most of that time. So I used the discussion boards to recreate this and to have them pretty much post you can see the responses here. And then for this number 4 right here, where I had them actually submit their planned interview questions, this was much more formal than anything that they had done in this course previously when I had taught it. But I really liked the accountability that was created here. And I think in a time of kind of chaos for them and trying to figure out what was happening in all of their classes and trying to stay on a healthy pace with big projects. I think this really helped them to have, you know, a date that they needed to post these questions and ideas by, so that they in turn would have time to get feedback. This created a very kind of healthy dynamic of accountability that I really loved. And
Kellye, before you move on, can I ask a question?
sure.
So just on this slide, let me just wrap my head around this. So we're in these learning team groups that you have, learning team group 2, 3, 4. And each group is doing these 4 discussions in a group. So if I'm in a group with you and we're to number 4, I have created my interview questions based on guidelines that are not right. We can't see what those guidelines are in this PowerPoint right now.
No.
But I can as a student. I've seen the guidelines of what the assignment is, and I post those to the discussion board and I get feedback. Is that what's going on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
I get feedback from you or just from my peers?
just from the peers, and it serves as a well, right here where it shows responding to teammates no later than Sunday, it says look through the list of questions and identify question. Like, it was guided there in terms of, and I kind of made them choose ones and identify questions that needed clarification, or in other words, it was pretty clear that you can't just say good job and move on. So I think a visual might help. On the next slide, I have a picture of what that feedback looked like within some learning teams, so that might be helpful to see.
So from what you're saying, you were really happy with their initial effort of those interview questions, even before they got feedback, or was
yes.
the feedback? Okay, awesome.
And the level of participation as well. I was monitoring that. I was trying to, you know, we take a risk of with participation here of not knowing how many students are going to respond on time and if that will disrupt the integrity of the assignment and getting feedback. But I was pleasantly surprised here. And this is an example of and this is just kind of entry level, lower division course. These students had spent time together previously, but I was pleased with the feedback that they were receiving and giving. Let's see, I have one more slide that has feedback.
And so then those students can reformat their questions, improve their questions before they hand them in to you, or before they do the interview, or what?
Both, yes. So the idea of this, that it was giving them enough time to just clarify or add or take away whatever they wanted to do before they were spending time with the other individual, and then also before turning in their reflection of the time spent together. And a side note, and this has to do with a question asked during Brittany's presentation, I did ask for feedback about this, and students reported that this sort of activity, this reciprocal feedback activity, it helped them feel close to their learning team members who they had grown like friendships with from January. And so they liked the opportunity to continue to give feedback, and just kind of, they were curious. And they also said that they liked that reading the work of other students helped them and gave them ideas for questions that they hadn't thought about. So yeah, it was a very positive experience. And I wrote here, I was surprised at how liberal the students were and comfortable giving the feedback. I didn't know how that would go. And I was, and I think the learning team element helped this. I had done icebreakers and things, and I plan on doing that remotely. You have to kind of build that culture of being able to give constructive feedback. And I think that was achieved here. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, so that was it. Hopefully I didn't go through that too quickly. I know that was a lot to look at.
Yeah, so people are asking me privately in the chat box about getting copies of this. Video is being recorded We do have a copy of this PowerPoint, and I'm sure Jamie and Brittany will share, everybody will share their resources with us. It's just fun learning from each other. Even the verbiage, the way that you write the discussions. Kellye, I had a question. You use permanent teams, is that true?
Yes, I do.
And can you just tick off pros and cons for that?
Especially in this environment, when we had to pivot, which is pretty much the theme of this fall also, I think that it really helped provide some continuity. And I really liked how students used the opportunity to build off of past conversations and activities that we had done. And they knew more about each other. So it seemed like we were able to hit the ground running more effectively. There wasn't the initial period of time of getting to know one another. So I think that in this unique context, it was especially helpful. And just doing it in general, I like how students learn how to challenge one another. And you can see, I think that longevity and that stability helps students develop their strengths and see strengths within one another. And when you provide like a variety of activities for them, it gives them other learning team members the opportunity to shine in areas that they might not have had the opportunity to. And that when you're constantly shuffling around, that might not be as conducive for students to feel comfortable with things like that. So.
Well, I'm a big believer in permanent teams, but I know that other people, I mean, Brittany uses rotating teams. I mean, I can see the advantage of that, but that's just something to put out there as people are developing their discussion boards and all their activities in their class or small groups. That's a major decision that you have to make right from the get-go. And there are pros and cons to both sides, but I agree with you, Kellye. It really helps. I really get to know a group of people and feel more comfortable sharing whatever, or giving critique. Yeah, any more questions? We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
I have a question that probably applies to everyone, but Jamie, I was most interested in the fact that you have multiple response times in your discussion boards, and curious if you're putting calendar reminders in Canvas for that, or how you're helping your students to track when they need to be responding on Canvas for those.
You know, it's the one thing I wish Canvas would add is the ability in an assignment to have multiple due dates. And if any of you know how to do that well in Canvas, I'd love to know. Because for the most part, I put it as reminders out to them. I'll send an email out, reminder out to them, but that's about what I can do to hold them accountable. And so I typically put the due date as the first thing that's due, and then they'll have follow-up, you know, maybe maybe up to 2 different follow-ups after the initial. But Canvas, from what I can tell, doesn't have a neat way to, you know, make your, you know, sort of 3 due dates for one assignment.
The workaround that I've used, and Donna, you can pop in on this, but the workaround that I've used that I've been taught is you can go into the calendar for that particular course and you can set due dates for responses. So you're not setting up an assignment, but you can name it the same as the assignment and set it up as a due date, so that it will pop up in Canvas as part of their to-do list and their calendar reminders.
Oh. Daphne, that's a great tip. Thank you for that. That's awesome.
I probably got it from Donna and Bernard. I'll give them credit.
And Donna is here. So thank you, Donna. You're awesome. One more question, maybe?
I am going to say, Jo, that I think we can add multiple due dates now. It's kind of complicated, but when they gave us the option to be able to add a due date separately for a separate student, you can also add a separate due date for everyone. We haven't really tested it out yet, but it'd be interesting to try if anybody's open to it.
Yes. Jamie, we'll let you do that.
Nice. Well, if I could just ask Daphne though, do you have to enter, so for you're creating one assignment, then you have to enter its due dates in there, but then you have to go into the calendar and for each of the others add something, and it adds it for everybody, does it?
It does, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think we will move on now. Kellye, thank you so much. This was incredible. Just, you've done such a great job. Very, very creative. And now we are going to move on to Kevin Doyle. And Kevin is the Director of Writing and Interdisciplinary Education in GPS and CEL. That's a mouthful, Kevin.
And we abbreviated GPS and CEL. Yeah, it's usually harder to say. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Good to come before you today. I got a thumbs up, so that's good. I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm learning just as much as everyone else. I was on a similar Zoominar that Joe put on a couple weeks ago with Brian Utterman, I think. And I know he's got another one coming up in maybe a couple of weeks, and I've got that circled on my calendar already. I thought that was fantastic. Like Joe, how to have good interactive discussions has been on my mind for a long time. I spend most of my time in Mission Valley working with our adult degree completion students and graduate students, and built into our classes already either fully online or hybrid, where a large part of student engagement is already built into Canvas. And so while maybe I've had more experience out of necessity with that, how to make it good isn't very easy, or it's not obvious. And so any sort of tricks and tips and best practices that my colleagues have, I'm ready to gobble those up. And it's in that spirit that I come before you today, not offering best practices by any means, but offering you what I've sort of come up with to take the limitations that I found in Canvas and apply it to the context that I teach in largely, which is 7-week, either hybrid or fully online classes. I think, though, that I can see how it can be translated to 15-week traditional undergrad classes, probably even fully face-to-face, but by adding sort of a thread through Canvas that unites the week or pulls it together, something like that. So I'm here to present my idea that I came up with, and with the help of lots of colleagues. To give a little context, Canvas is good, or maybe it's even great in lots of areas, but it's lacking in some other areas. And I think the discussion tool, I can sense the limitations in Canvas, that it doesn't allow for a lot of different things that I wish that it did. And so trying to think of a solution within those limitations has been my challenge. And if you have used Canvas discussions, which I've sort of heard from the other folks talking and the questions that folks have been asking, one thing you might notice is students come with, they have developed discussion fatigue, or maybe discussion hypnosis, which is like that driving hypnosis where you end up at the office and you don't remember driving there. It's something that just is part of your day, where students, at least especially students in our context, where they have all of their classes are based in Canvas mostly, it's typically the post and 2 replies, post and 2 replies, post and 2 replies, and it is just part of their academic cycle that they have to do. And in the middle of the semester or in the middle of their program, you can really sense sometimes that they're on autopilot. And so it's with that I thought, how can I create something or come up with a plan that recharges the discussion, that connects, if we're meeting face-to-face, it connects our time in the classroom with Canvas and the actual Canvas discussion itself. And what I came up with, I named the weekly facilitated discussion. So I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. But what I want to do is touch just briefly on what Jamie said. He mentioned very briefly, don't make it overcomplicated, right? I think that there was that one week that he showed us where it was the directions, there were a lot of bullet points. As you'll see here, mine's very complicated. But what I do is in week 1, I model what I'm looking for. So I'm the facilitator in week 1 to show them what to do, so that in weeks 2 through 7 in our 7-week classes, the students can facilitate. And let's see, I wrote it down. Oh, I'll show you also just very, very briefly, something that Brittany mentioned about the groups. So you'll be able to see what it looks like having group discussions. All right, I'm gonna try to get this to work. So my hope is you can see that. So this is a class from earlier, I think in the summer. And if I go to modules, again, I've called this weekly facilitated discussions. Let's go to week 5. And I have 2 entries there. You can see weekly discussion facilitator submission, which is 50 points, and then the weekly facilitated discussion, 20 points. And I'll go into that a little bit. So here is my complicated directions. And I bet, Jamie, when you look at that, you'll make yourself feel better because your 3 bullet points or whatever isn't that bad. So it's pretty complicated. It's lots of different days. There's different roles. There's different things that they need to do. I've created, or each semester or each time I teach the class, I make a similar version of a YouTube talk, just a 3-minute video that I send the class, me walking them through that. And what I'll actually do, if I can find it, it's not here. For some reason, I can't see the chat with this open. So at the end, when I stop sharing my screen, I've put the directions in a Google document that I'll just share with everybody in the chat so that you can see that. But basically the idea here is, instead of having students each week, every student each week do their initial post and 2 replies, initial post, 2 replies, what we do is, you can kind of read it at the top, is week 1, I set up a facilitated discussion chart where I've gone through and created sort of themes for each week. And those themes match up with the content of that week's class. And then I have students sign up for a topic. The class that I'm showing you right now has 2 groups. So it's the same, it's a carbon copy of topics and themes, but just different students are signing up for them. So after they've signed up and we know, okay, in week 2, these are the facilitators, in week 3, week 4. I'm showing you 1 week here. So you'll see that the page I'm looking at is actually the facilitated discussion page. But if I scroll down to where the discussion typically is, it's empty. It's because those discussions are living within the group, the groups. So I'll click on one of the groups, which will give me exactly the same page, but this time when I scroll down, I get to the students' content. Typically there were, depending on the size of the class, 2 or 3 facilitators for each week. And they, so we'll see the one right here. This is a facilitator's post. Over that theme that they signed up for, they give a little bit of an introduction. They include some sort of an artifact, typically a YouTube video, but sometimes it's a quiz or an article or something like that. And they come up with some discussion questions. And then, I'm gonna skip the summary video. Then I have students record 2 to 3 minute reply videos. So instead of typing out a reply, each student has to do a video reply. And there are directions in Canvas, which I've included in my directions, how to do that right inside Canvas. Some students have trouble with that, and so they just make a YouTube video and post the link, and then Canvas does a pretty good job of turning that link into a box with the video. And so I'll scroll down, and you'll see that there'll be these videos for every several posts. The videos are due, I think, depending on when I have my class, typically Wednesday by midnight. And then after every student has done a video response, then students need to hold that. After everyone's done a video response, the facilitator needs to go back, watch the videos, and then do a summary video, like to take, here's what the conversation has been, synthesize it, and then push it forward through by adding either another artifact or some more discussion questions. And if I scroll back up to the top, that's what the student's summary video right here, where she summarized and synthesized the discussion so far, introduced some new questions, and then the assignment for the participants is to go back by Sunday at midnight and reply to at least 2 more of their classmates' posts. And they can do those by typing them out. Super complicated sounding. But that's why we have that first week or I sort of demonstrate it for them. And typically they catch on really quickly. And when I introduced it, I was a little nervous that I don't know, it would be too complicated or something. And from the first week when students started doing it, I was blown away because it was such a drastic difference from the typical discussion where it's one post, 2 replies, 1 post, 2 replies. The other thing that it sort of coincided, we implemented it in the spring semester, with the idea that we would be in a hybrid environment. And so the idea was that the facilitator would, in our class, face-to-face class, would do the synthesis, would say, okay, I've listened to the videos, I've watched the videos here, and then they would push the conversation forward, and that by Sunday at midnight, students would then reply. My whole purpose was to, how do I use, I think I already said this, how to use Canvas to create and facilitate authentic discussion. So it doesn't feel like something that's tacked on, okay, you got to just do these discussions, that it feels like it's something that's built into the class. But as we all experienced, we stopped having those hybrid classes, and we were able to then, for that course, transition to our Zoom times. So we would have Zoom, and we would spend part of our Zoom each week doing this. But then in this past summer, because of I teach a lot of nursing students, and a lot of those nursing students, their schedules got messed up. We were not able to have a single night each week. And so I scrubbed the Zoom part of it and just said, this will happen during the week on whenever you can get it done, or at least following the due dates. And they have gone above and beyond.
Kevin, can I just jump in and ask, we just have a few minutes, but do you have some kind of requirement for them to watch this summary video, and do you like keep track of that?
I don't. I just assume that they're doing it, I guess. I showed you when I first started sharing my screen, I think that each week I have 2 assignments. One is the facilitator assignment, which is a 50-point thing. And that lives sort of under my assignments or my projects bucket. Then I have the 20-point discussion, which is almost like a participation thing. And I use specs grading for the discussion part. So if they've done their post and they've done their replies and it's on time and it's relatively good, they get full points. If the facilitator, they have a rubric that they have to follow to get their points, and it includes being on time, doing each of the things that I've asked for. So facilitators and participants live a little bit differently. One of the advantages, really quick, is instead of having students facilitate every single week, so they feel like every week I have to do this again and again and again, the idea is they're a facilitator for 1 week. And then the rest of the time, they're participants. And I think that that has, at least for our students who sometimes get overwhelmed with the number of discussions, it's helped because they don't have to feel like they're the ones doing that initial post every single week.
And have you noticed that the facilitator, I mean, I would imagine the first facilitator would be at a disadvantage where the second, third, fourth, they've watched what's going on. Do you
That's why I try to, yeah, that's why I'm the first facilitator to show. And I haven't experienced where a student in the second week has done, I mean, they kind of set the standard. It really has been this experience where that week 2, it's usually 2 or 3 facilitators. They set the bar very high, and then the rest of the students keep it high. And so luckily it's worked out that way.
Well, I know this is, I mean, Kevin and I talked about just that this is complicated, but it's so intriguing. And I love the results that he's getting. We have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions. Does anybody have a question?
I just pasted the, if you want to see what those instructions look at, and there's a link to my actual YouTube video so you can hear me try to explain it. One thing that I really tried to focus on, and then I'll be done, was building or maintaining community. And I think that that was a question that someone asked. I also had a comment from this specific class that I'm sharing. It was at the idea evaluation at the end. And I had that class, their first semester, for a 1-unit online only writing class. And this one student said, we already had this guy and no one thought he did a good job. But But this class changed everyone's impression. Talking about the community, and to be honest, to me, it doesn't say anything about me. It talks about the format and the ways for students to engage. In our 1 unit, 15-week online only class, there just isn't, at least I haven't developed a good way for that to happen. But in this class, there were ways for students to feel like they were part of a community. And I think that experience changed their view, or at least that one student's view. Very little to do with myself here.
And how do you put students in groups?
Depends on the size. Typically, I don't have to. It's just the class. Maybe our classes are 12 or 15 students. But if it gets into the 20 student range, just like I think Brittany talked about, through the people groups, you can create a group and it does it automatically.
And how many in your groups?
Well, ideally it's a large number. It's because I want there to be lots of conversation. I want there to be 2 or 3 facilitators each week. So whatever that works out to be.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, we're going to have to stop, but that was very creative. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Taking a deep breath, that was awesome. We're going to move on to our last presenter, who is Bettina Pedersen. She's Professor of Literature and Women's Studies. So Bettina, if you'll unmute, we'd love to hear what you have to share.
All right, I'm going to share my screen with you, I hope.
Yes.
You can all see this well. And forgive me for being part of a fire hose of information. If you're like me, you're feeling overwhelmed and like you just can't take it all in. So I hope this will be very practical and straightforward. There were 4 practices that governed the way I put my discussion board together, and this is primarily from a fully online class this summer. But I am now expanding that online class to a hybrid class, so I'm continuing to experiment. But my guiding principles were these. I wanted predictable structures and guidelines so students could easily get into a rhythm and a routine, and it would be familiar to them and be comfortable. I also wanted there to be variety in the kinds of posts and replies that they did, so they would not get tired and wearied by too much routine. I did use rubrics for grading, and that was a very helpful and streamlining process and set up clear expectations for the students. And I was actively involved in participating with them, mostly in comments, because when it's fully online, you do not have any synchronous Zoom time. So all of my connecting and interaction was at the keyboard. So it was very keyboard heavy. So what this looked like, practice number 1 looked like, was that I gave very detailed instructions at the very beginning of the course in the first discussion board assignment so that they could see clearly what my expectations were. I then used the same basic format and parameters throughout for every single discussion board post, and you'll see that in the slides that follow in a minute. I always included a question sheet, which was a live link in the same place in the discussion board, so that the students could use that to guide their reading, to highlight key concepts and passages, and to give them substantive context for the discussion board posts and replies. These question sheets were not meant for them to respond to. They were meant to be a guide for the reading, and also I think for the study for the exams. And then the detailed instructions very quickly became a very short rule set that I repeated for the first 2 weeks or so, and then those disappeared as well. And so what was left on the discussion board itself was just the heart of the discussion. So this was what the very first post looked like. And you can see with these brackets, these were my very involved discussions, instructions, which maybe don't look that involved now after everything that you have seen. But the discussion board post and reply was always in this blue box. It always followed this very same format. The post was here, the reply was below it, and if there was no reply, that was indicated in red. Sometimes there were, I added things after the discussion board box as required things that I wanted them to do or as enrichment things that I wanted them to do. And you can see in this second slide that the rule set down here at the bottom was just that very small set right here from the previous slide that became the guiding reminders for them. And then those disappeared about week 3. This particular post you see does have a post and reply. They didn't all have a post and reply. So that was part of the variety. So the second guiding principle was to keep it engaged by having them do different kinds of things. So sometimes I only had them post and no replies at all. I would be giving them some comments in the speed grader and sometimes on the rubrics, sometimes just a like as I read through the post. But I usually use the post only on the Thursday class because they had very much less time between a Tuesday and a Thursday class than between a Thursday and a Tuesday class. So that was one way for me to be sensitive to their workload, to try to keep the pacing of the class manageable for them, because this is a literature class, so they're doing hours and hours of reading. So that must be balanced against the actual kind of discussion work that they're doing and assignment work that they're doing. Open replies, when they did have post and replies, those where they could reply to whomever student they wanted to, and there were no restrictions on how many replies they could make to a given post. That was completely open. On more restricted replies, again, I varied this. Sometimes I asked for only 1 reply per post. Sometimes I said no more than 2 replies per post. And sometimes I asked them to reply with even more restrictions than just that. Maybe I wanted them to reply to 2 posts or only 1 post. Sometimes I wanted them to do some connecting between the question sheet, which was always in this place on the discussion board. And sometimes I didn't. I just wanted them to use that as a guide. If there were additional assignments that I sometimes would have them to do, like for example here, they had to fill in a table. This was a particular table assignment for the color purple where they were tracking the narrative voices in the novel. I wanted them to actually see how many pages were devoted to which sister's voice so that they could really analyze the multiplicity of voices and how that worked in the style and the voice of the craft of the novel that Walker had created. So there was a lot of blending this very routine structure with variety, 1 post or multiple posts. You can see here as well that the writing instruction that we did give, my grader and I, we had a system where we would identify things in their posts that needed correction and then put in parentheses what the correction was. And part of the parameters of my course is to let them know that all their discourse is public discourse and to blend a kind of writing workshop model with a literature course. So they're getting writing instruction that supports and emphasizes what they learn in college composition, but also that teaches them the way we talk about literary texts in this discipline and how our writing and our critical thinking are linked up together. So my TA, I did have a TA for this class. She went through the posts before I did so that I could then amplify what she had said. I could also spot very quickly what the level of writing instruction I might need to give to a particular student was. If I go back, do I have to stop my share and reshare? I want you to see the PowerPoint. For woman at this slide is for woman at point 0. So you can see here what I asked them to do, in addition to watching a few very short videos here, was in the discussion board post and reply, I gave them some specific instructions about the question sheet, so that they had to zero in on a particular part of the question sheet, choose something very specific, write in response to that choice something more broad about the novel itself, and then use that as a heading in their post. The reason the heading was important was so that in the reply, the students who chose to reply had to reply to someone who had chosen a different opposition than the one they had chosen. So it made identifying that very easy for the students. Most of them remembered to include headings, not all of them did. And then the other way that I tried to vary this was also just giving them permission to respond with a like. Respond to an actual post with a reply, but also do some liking, just to force students to kind of scroll down and give some indication that there was interaction, a little bit like you would have had in a real class where people would smile and nod at you. That's kind of like a like. And so to vary that a little bit as well for the students. Sometimes the additional material that I put before or after the post proper was just for enrichment. It wasn't required. So again, I tried to keep a lot of variety happening around this very central and predictable routine, and the links in the same places, so that they didn't have to sort of wade through a lot of difference when they came to the discussion board post for that particular day. I did use rubrics. They were wonderful in streamlining my time spent. I also think they gave clear criteria for the students, and I'm happy to show anybody how to set that up. But when you create your discussion board, you have these wonderful 3 little dots, and I've already set the rubric up here, and that's why it says show rubric. But if you have not attached a rubric to a discussion board, what you will see where my cursor is right now is add rubric. And when you click on that, it will take you, it will open up a different window, and there are just scores of rubrics available. I did spend quite a bit of time just kind of browsing through, seeing what the wonderful folks in OIT had already uploaded for me that I didn't have to build myself, which was wonderful because I have built rubrics in here before and it does take quite a bit of time. But once you've selected a rubric and attached it to your discussion board, your 3 little dot menu is going to say show rubric, and when you click that, it will actually open up the rubric here so you can all see it for what it will look like in the speed grader. When you click on speed grader, you all know what that looks like, I'm sure, but you'll also have a separate little button right under the points possible that says view rubric, and you can click on that and this rubric will actually open up for you in speed grader. And what's wonderful about that is you can simply click on these cells to give the kind of assessment that you want, the score that you want. You can adjust the points if you need to when you are editing the rubric, which is this little edit pencil right here. And there is, when you're in SpeedGrader, there's a little caption button you can click on right below the points, which opens up a comment bar underneath each criterion. So you have actually 3 places where you can interact with students with comments, either directly in the rubric, in which is private, in SpeedGrader on the side, which is private, or in the discussion board post itself in responding to what the students say, which is public. The last thing that I did, really my participation with them in the discussion boards was a huge piece of connecting with my students. And I actually did engage in the discussions very randomly. You know, it's good random reinforcement to keep the students engaged. They never really knew how much or little I was going to engage in the discussion thread, but they always got comments from me in SpeedGrader and in, well, not always, but often in the rubrics as well. And it gave me an opportunity to reinforce MLA style, which in my discipline was important, very important to me, because I could see lots of mistakes being made in the discussion boards and I just couldn't let them go. So this is an example here of the kinds of comments that I might make early on in a discussion board, just saying interesting questions and asked a follow-up question. Or I would say, make some additional comment in support of what the student had said and say, keep watching this. If there were errors, and there sometimes were, students would misread, they would assume cousins were siblings, and that I had to correct immediately, otherwise it would cause confusion for them throughout. So sometimes I was a lot more direct, sometimes, you know, a little bit of positive praise first and then some correction second. So that kind of varied depending upon what the students needed. And although this is the last of my formal presentation, I did include a few more slides of pictures of the discussion board posts that I took you to on the live links, because you don't have access to those live links.
Wow, Bettina, thank you so much. That was just wonderful presentation. I do have one question. I've never seen but even the idea of going into the discussion board and correcting there. And do you see that students, like, their writing gets better over the time of the semester as you do that?
Some of them pay attention. Some of them demonstrate to me what sometimes my children demonstrated to me, which is the absolute human resilience against learning. They just kept making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And so, you know, students are human beings. Some of them did improve. Some of them quickly made these very small adjustments that they needed to. Some of them didn't. But I still think it's my responsibility, teaching in the discipline that I do, to offer that sort of feedback.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to bring this session to a close because we are at time. If you want to stick around and ask Bettina some questions, or any of our other presenters, please do. Bettina, if you could stop sharing, that would help us be able to see everybody a little bit better. Great. Again, thank you to each one of our presenters. This has been above and beyond anything that I was expecting. And I had a pretty high expectation, but I learned a lot, and I'm sure all of you did. Thank you. And if you have some questions, you can stick around. Okay, does anyone have questions? Or do you just want to?
Bettina, are those red comments that you make about grammar, are they viewable, public viewing, or is that private?
Yes, those are public, and some of them are about grammar, some of them are about mechanics, some of them are just stylistic things, ways for students to improve the quality of their writing, the specificity of their writing. It really ranges across individual writers.
Keith, have you and Bettina done anything with women composers and women authors?
Together, no.
Not together. We've talked about it. Lots of conversations over the table.
I'd be interested in hearing it.
Bettina, I would love to, if you would share some of your question sheets with me. I'm very intrigued with what those are, how much guidance you give, that kind of thing.
I worked with Kathy Potter on my online course, and with Donna too. There's a lot of content in those question sheets, which is why I kept them off of the front facing of the discussion board, because I don't want to overwhelm students. I really want them to focus in on what I determined was a key question. And then they can use all of that other content to enrich their thinking and their reflecting ongoingly with the novel. But I really wanted to not make discussion boards feel like a fire hose, but to keep it sort of straightforward and simple. And one of the comments I got from one of my male students was really pleasing to me, was that he liked the way I pushed back on some of his comments and questions. He really learned a lot from that. And another comment, I think this was from a woman student, she really liked how straightforward the course was. So I took from those two comments that some of what I had intended in the structure that I built worked the way that I wanted it to.
Well, to all of the presenters, if you will send me whatever you have that you would like, we would love to put this on our website. I mean, there are people sending me emails. They want a copy of the video. They want resources. They love looking at your directions. And I mean, we're just all learning from each other. This is such a Point Loma thing that our faculty help each other. It's really beautiful.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I've always resisted discussions and replies is because I've never figured out how to make the grading of both the discussion and the reply quick, easy, and efficient. Demonstrating which side of the family the boys get the resistance to learning from, after 3 times of Bettina explaining to me this morning, I think I finally figured it out. So Bettina, if you could just really quickly show us how that works, I think that might be helpful to breaking down some of the resistance using discussion.
Is that okay with you, Jo?
It's fine with me. I mean, I'm just giving everybody permission to leave if you're ready to.
Everybody can leave when they want to. And if it's presenters staying, I'm sure they know how to do it. All right, so I'll share my screen again. And I'll X out of this. So if I'm in the discussion board, let's see. This one has a rubric already. So I've already set up a rubric here. So I would click on Speed Grader. And it will take me straight away into the Speed Grader, which shows you both the original post of the student and whatever replies were required. So this student, Carter Agassi, has her post and her reply in one place. So here I can make comments to her. If I click on the View Rubric and slide this over, I can make comments in the rubric itself, and I can actually click on scores here if I want to, if I'm using the rubric to grade. And so that's how I grade it. I don't make corrections in this because when you're in SpeedGrader, you can't make corrections. But if you click on View the Full Discussion, then you can go back into the discussion thread itself and you can make edits on the student post by, again, clicking these 3 dots, and it will allow you to edit a student's post, which is how we were able to put the writing instructions straight into their work. And I usually have 2 Canvas windows open, one to the full discussion thread like this so that I can see the context of the posts and replies. And if I want to make edits, I can when I spot mistakes. And then the other to the SpeedGrader post itself, or the SpeedGrader window in Canvas itself. And I just kind of toggle back and forth between those 2 separate windows to do whichever part of the assessing I need to do.
And how do you give a credit for the replies to the post?
So that was built into the rubric. And again, you can adjust these points if you want to. I'm having a hard time getting this to move for some reason. But if you scroll down here, one of the criteria is participation. So this is not worth half, and I didn't want it to be worth half. It's worth 1.5 out of 5 points. And it has a distinguished, proficient, basic, below, and non-performance. So if a student doesn't respond at all, they get a 0 for that part of the 5 points on the discussion. And I took my lead from Kathy Potter that you don't really need to give a lot of points here. Few points are equally motivating. And when you have this many discussions over the course of a semester, I think your weighting can get kind of out of balance if you put too many points attached to each discussion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does me.
And what about the dates for the that they're due?
There was some discussion about that. And again, what I understood from Kathy was that we could only have one actual deadline. And I know Donna has said there are some workarounds. I was fine with one deadline, and I made the post deadline the real deadline, but I didn't start grading until the next day, which was the reply deadline date. So that students, I was never grading things before they had a chance to actually do both the post and the reply. For me, it just kept it simple. I'm terrified at the thought of having to go in and add calendar reminders for all of those separate assignments. There's already so much clicking in Canvas. For me, I'm going to keep it simple.
Donna, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I just want to say that you have to be really careful when you're making changes to the discussions or adding feedback that has to do with grading or editing inside of the live discussion, because that would be considered a FERPA violation. So you want to keep your feedback about their grading or assessment inside those comments. Also, one of the things I do, because I too do not want to add calendar events for their follow-up due dates, is that in the grade book, I of course always keep them the same. Like I say, your initial post is due on Monday and you must follow up to respond by Wednesday. So in my mind, all the discussions are Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday. And then I go into the grade book and I just send out a reminder using that quick access tool on Wednesday that just says, just a reminder, your responses to your classmates are due today. And I don't even care if they've already done them, because I just phrase it as just a reminder. And because, you know, it helps for those students that haven't done it.
And can I just echo what Donna said? All the grading, the actual assessing of points was done in the private comments, never, ever, ever in the discussion thread. It was only the actual writing instruction and stylistic suggestions, grammar suggestions, those kinds of things that were done in the public forum. And I never sent out a reminder about replies, not one. I put the deadlines in the discussion board post and let the students take responsibility for doing it when it needed to be done.
All right, well, I am going to bring this to a close. This has been awesome. Presenters, thank you so much. If you will share your resources with us, we will appreciate them and disseminate them. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a great rest of your day.